Well, hello, welcome. Today we're going to conclude our first chapter in our new study, 2 Samuel chapter 1. This will actually be our third lesson, and we had an introductory lesson on the background and history and just kind of setting the scene. We looked at the middle of the chapter last week, and today we're going to see the conclusion. But to get you thinking about the topic in this conclusion, there is a refrain in our passage today, and I think it's very important. And the refrain is, how the mighty have fallen. Now, I got to thinking about this, and we're going to come back to this point, but just at the beginning, before we go any further, what do you think of when you think of the mighty? You could think about it today, you could think about it, across time. Here's some images that came to my mind, and there could be a whole lot more. I think of mighty maybe in terms of history. I think of the Roman Empire with the Caesars. Some people were ones that I have very high regard for, like President Washington, the first president of the United States. I can think of other great leaders. Some we might think of mighty. It's not just somebody that we may think of as good. Mighty could be power, like Adolf Hitler. Power can be political, power can be money, influence. I'm just putting some random images here. You may fill it in with your own. But what we're looking at in this chapter is the most mighty, if you will, or the most powerful at the time of Israel. So back to our chapter of just 1 minute review. As we opened it up, David is in Ziklag, and he had been in a time of departure or exile. Now he is kind of coming back to himself. He had been through a lot. And this man comes to him with news that he does not know. And the news that he has, and by the way, he is carrying the crown of Saul and the armlet of Saul. And he tells him that Saul and Jonathan and really Israel itself was in a lot of trouble, and these people have died. Now, as it was exposed, this man was a Amalekite, and part of the army of the enemy of God. He had been telling lies. We went through all that in great detail. He had said that Saul had called out to him and asked him to take his life, and that he was the one that had put the sword on him, but that's not true. For Saul had taken his own life, and it was a very sad ending for him in his time as king. And so that man, for his lies and because of what he said, because he represented the flesh, he was executed. But David, though this is really, that man was lying to him because he thought he could get in good maybe with David, and maybe the fleshly side of David could have seen this as an opportunity to rise to power. He chose to mourn. He and his men mourned. And, the king is dead, so it's not just the personal mourning. Just like in our country, if we lose our president, however we feel about the president, it is going to be kind of a time of chaos as well. So Israel is also hurting here. It's a very important time. So David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and Jonathan, his son. It's private, but it's also public. He said it should be taught to the people of Judah. And behold, it is written in the book of Jashar. Now, that's not a book in the canon of the Bible. It's mentioned in a couple of places. It was some other book that they had, but it's not part of the Bible. But it's some things that we think about this that affects our life today that we learn. Is one, it's appropriate to lament and have lamentations over loss. We all are going to have loss in our life. It's part of the shared human existence, and at times, think of times maybe like 9/11, where we may grieve as a country, or think of times where a president has passed and been assassinated. This is part sometimes of life, that life's not just always a party. Life's not always just fun. Sometimes we have lamentations in difficult times. And so what we're going to have next is a time of a eulogy that's going to take place here. So eulogies, what we're going to have here, we still do these today. I myself have participated in several of them. It's certainly not something that, is what I would call fun or enjoyable, but it is something important and meaningful. Again, some things in life are just great amusement, great joy, great fun, but this is something important that we do. Sometimes they are public. A country. I think of things that I've seen in our country. Even in the last year, there's been a prominent public figure. We've had the passing of a president at times, and it might be televised. There might be thousands of people gathered. But most of the time, and certainly the ones that I've participated in giving eulogy in the service, is a private event for the family. Now, this was private to David. It was personal to David, but it was also public, for the nation of Israel. So it's written kind of like a song, if you will. I said it was, this way. That's sometimes how they learned things. But so I'm going to read through it all. I'll make a few comments, but I wanted to start with this. This idea, which is part of life, and why we have these eulogies, lamentations, and services. And it goes back to our study of Ecclesiastes, the study of maybe the greatest of the most mighty men. At the end of his life, we did a long study of Ecclesiastes. But it's about this process, that there is a time to be born and a time to die for all, the small and the mighty. There's a time we weep, just like there's times we should laugh. There's times we mourn, just like there's times we dance. And there's times that we lose, and it's part of this shared existence of life. And so we're getting this picture of David privately and publicly leading the nation. And so here's the first use we see of this phrase. Your glory, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gab. Publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. The mighty, they can get away with a lot in this world. Sometimes the mighty fall in terms of being involved in scandal. And certainly Saul had his share of problems. But ultimately, the greatest, we think whoever in your mind represents the greatest of leaders today or in times past, no matter what, they're going to fall. The mighty will fall, in the end. And it says, you mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor fields of offerings. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul not anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Shields, bows, and swords cannot save us. But you may or may not recall from 1 Samuel, Jonathan was a very skilled archer. But ironically, what took the lives of Israel were the archers, the enemy. One of the things that was their strength was also their downfall. And today we don't use a lot of bows and swords, but whatever we think is our source of power can't save us in the end. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. You daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. One thing that's part of this process is he could have chosen here, perhaps justly, to talk about Saul's mistakes in particular, his sins even. He had gone kind of into madness. He had unjustly created scandal against David. He had tried to take his life, but he's choosing the high ground here. And at times of eulogies and services, whatever may have happened, this is a time, I believe, that's part of the healing process, not to create division. It's not the time. It's the time to choose grace. It's the time to choose those thoughts. We see, again, David as a spiritual man, not tearing them down, but speaking well. And he comes back to this in his song of eulogy. And again, he reminds us of how the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. And then he makes a special comment about Jonathan. Jonathan, was so much about their relationship. In 1 Samuel, he was a brother, it says. He loved him very much. It says he loved him more than women. By the way, there's kind of a little foreshadowing there of the problems that David had with women. This was a weakness in his life, and maybe he didn't love the women in his life the way he should have, and that's why he had many, the Bible does not shy away, that he had many relationships, improper relationships, but he had a pure brotherly love with Jonathan, and that's something very deeply personal. But he says now, for the third time, which is the theme of our message, the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war perished. So what are some lessons we can take from this? It's not fun to think about grief and death, but we have to acknowledge the truth. And we're going to move on to a whole new chapter. And this is part of the closure process. That God does not want us to stay anchored in our grief. And David's not going to stay anchored in his grief, and the people shouldn't stay anchored. But there's a time for grief. As Ecclesiastes said, there's times to experience loss in different ways. It's part that if you are human, you're not going to escape it. It's natural. It's existence from the time of David to the time of today and all the thousands of years in between. Now, in our grief, we should choose to remember good. We have eulogies. We have these times. He chose love. He chose to go high. He chose not to spit on his grave. Part of that mourning process, we should choose to remember people and speak well of them. But there's a bigger lesson in all this, which I believe is the biggest theme of all. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. The mighty, however we picture them, for good or for bad, in whatever capacity, they are not immune. None of us are. You may say, well, I'm not mighty. Well, you're not immune either. The day comes for everyone. While in this world, for some, money and power allows escape, and they can get away with things. But in the end, even the most mighty, doesn't matter who you are. If you're a king, a prime minister, or a president, doesn't matter what you are, you may or may not have a time of falling in this world. We'll all fall into sin. There may be a public falling, but we're all going to be equal, and that our lives will eventually fall. And someday the eulogy will be for us. But for every person, they will face their Creator, the one who made us, the one that nobody is mighty before. And that's God. And Revelation 20:12 says, I saw the dead, great and small. You may be great in this world, you may be small in this world, you may be somewhere in between, but we'll all stand before the throne, and the books will be open. We want our name written in the book of life. It's not about the money in your bank account. Honestly, it's not even about our good deeds. It's about if our name is written in the book of life. No matter who you are, the only name for your name to be written there, the only way for your name to be written there, is to accept the perfect King, the true King Jesus. It's almost Christmas as we celebrate his birth. And I pray that your name is written in the book of life. I pray you have received Jesus. These are some things that are part of our life. Hard to think about, but so important to think about. So I hope you will reflect upon these things